Welcome back to Bruce's Bees, everyone. Tonight we have a special guest. We have Gus Mitchell here with us, and we're going to talk about some pretty important topics, some really cool topics. I've met Gus probably about a year ago. I think I met you at Hive Life, Gus, in
hmm
2022,
Yes, sir.
but we had you on a Stream Team live beekeeping chat in April of last year, and that's when I really got to know you. Before that, I didn't know a whole lot about you, but I must say I've been really impressed with what you're doing. I know you're up there in West Memphis, actually in Arkansas, correct?
It's kind of a tri-state area. I actually keep bees in West Memphis and Tennessee, in the Shelby County area, and also in North Mississippi as well. So, kind of follow the river, Mississippi River, and it's kind of just the Memphis metro area.
Introduce yourself briefly, kind of tell us who you are. I know a lot of folks know who you are already.
I'm Gus Mitchell, and I run around 300 colonies. I'm trying to grow actively. I do it for a business. I have been fortunate enough to be able to find enough avenues to explore with that to make it viable for me. A big part of that is being in the Memphis metro area, being this close to a city and having this much population and diversity and different groups of people wanting different products. It helps me to be successful with a smaller colony count. Previously, I worked in the oil field. I moved to the Memphis area in 2015, and I brought some colonies, what I could fit in the truck with me, and it's just a very rich area as far as the nectar flows and beekeeping goes. It's just it's a lot easier to keep bees here than it was in the mountains. So it grew from a serious hobby into a business for me.
Well, that's great. I think, this series I'm doing, the playlist on my YouTube channel is intentional beekeeping is what I've titled it. And we've kind of developed that theme a little bit on our stream team, a live beekeeping chats with Brian from Castle Hives and Greg from Nature's Image Farm. I wanted to have you on here because if I haven't learned anything else about you, Gus, from watching and getting to know you a little bit, is that you are intentional about what you do, and you have to be to do what you're doing. And a lot of people feel like you have to have thousands of colonies to do it full time, yet you're able to make a living with the 300 to 400 colonies that you have. Talk a little bit about what it takes to do that, kind of what some of your strategies are to be able to make a living doing that, and just kind of walk us through how you do that.
The first thing you have to figure out for yourself is what a living is to you, what you need to make to get by on, and where you're at in your life with family and other things that what you can get away with. Also, how you're going to build up. Are you going to borrow money, or are you going to let the bees pay for it all? I've been able to do what I'm doing because I'm able to have different markets here. Being in this large metro area, I can sell a lot of comb honey. I can sell pollen. I can sell different products from the hive. I can sell a lot of my own honey, and that helps. That's money coming in. There's a good nuke market. Selling bees is easy in this area. We have a very large bee club. Following more of a European beekeepers business model type is kind of what I'm doing. I watch those guys and see how they do things. And most of those guys over there aren't that large operations. They're running maybe a few hundred colonies and one man operations. Their equipment they're using is different. It's just so vastly different than the American almond pollination commercial beekeeper business model. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it takes employees, it takes a lot of equipment, equipment expense, and it's just a different type of beekeeping than what I'm interested in doing.
Before we delve into that a little bit, who are some of your favorite people over there that some viewers might be able to kind of watch and learn? Maybe some YouTube guys or whatever. Who do you recommend folks kind of turn to watch a little bit of that, about where you base some of your stuff?
The English speaking ones are definitely some favorites, like Richard Noel and
Okay.
Black Mountain Honey over there. There are quite a few. I think they're Russian, and there's a couple Italian guys. I can't even read their names or what they do, but I follow their channels and I watch what they do. But definitely Richard Noel.
I guess over there in some ways they don't have the opportunity to do a lot of what we can do over here with the big heavy equipment, the
hmm
migratory bees to pollination, to all different types of crops as far as almonds, blueberries, whatever they move them to. They probably have to be a little more creative in what they're doing as far as how they can make a living with, kind of in a stationary situation. And so that makes sense. I've never really thought about that before, how their methods would be different. But I need to look at more of that, because I know that in a lot of ways they're doing it the old ways that they're over there, possibly, as far as like kind of how it was originally done, back in the day. I know you run Russian bees. I just dropped a nugget from our original video about those.
Yeah.
And I know those are kind of from over there in that area. Some of them you kind of explained that in the video, so I'll let folks go and watch it there if they want to, about where the Russians come from. But so many ways to do it. That's one thing about beekeeping that I like, that also is very frustrating. Number one, I like it because it's challenging and there's so many ways to do it. But number two, it's frustrating because there's so many ways to do it. So it's hard to figure out. At least for me, it's hard for me to figure out exactly what I want to do. So kind of run us through your model, as far as you mentioned that basically it sounds like you have multiple streams of revenue that are coming in. We're coming up on spring right now when this video is being recorded. Kind of a good time to kind of walk us through your strategy throughout the year, kind of what you're doing now, how you prepare, and then kind of timing on how you do things.
Yeah, bee sales are huge. I don't sell a lot of queens. When I do sell queens, I sell them in after I've it'd be early summer, late spring, after I've made up all my nukes. Nuke sales are huge. It's money on the front end. If you're fortunate enough to live in an area like I am that you have a summer flow, then you can still make good crops of honey. At this point in my operation, I really don't focus very much on spring honey. So I do a lot of hard splitting in the spring to get those nukes out. That's a large chunk of what the income is going to be. And then a lot with the honey is just selling your own honey is very important. Bulk sales, it just doesn't even compare with getting it in a bottle and getting it out there. I mean, there's a lot of time involved in that, but especially if you can involve your family, it's definitely worthwhile. You're going to make a lot more money. Even within the honey, I focus quite a bit on comb honey. I do live in an area where comb honey is in demand. You kind of got to explore your own market and area and figure out who wants what and what you can sell. You may not be in an area that will support much comb honey production, but you could certainly go out and find it. You can ship and things like that. I haven't had to get into shipping product really, thankfully, because that's another headache to deal with. But that pollen, I'm just getting into some propolis collection. That's something that I would like to get into for this year. But pollen collecting, there's a good market here as well for the pollen through restaurants and chefs. I also offer classes. I have a classroom on the side of my honey house. I'll do beekeeping classes throughout the year during good weather seasons. Anything from beginner to advanced, and that's something, guys. It adds up. I know maybe some guys wouldn't want to fool with that, but at the end of the day, it all adds up to a truck payment or electricity bill or what have you. I think a lot of beekeepers are guilty of getting that bee fever, and it lasts. It lasts throughout, just not just being a beginner, but as you go on through, if it's really a passion for you, it's a hard thing to shake. Hindsight, I think I would have held off dedicating myself to it full time until I had grown out a little bit more, because it is agricultural work, and there's ups and downs, and if you're not really good at managing your money, you're going to have some problems, because it comes in waves and crops. You have to save this money, and you have to be able to save it to use for expenses throughout the year, for gesture boxes, for frames, equipment to expand with, packing materials, all this. So it's a lot to really think about. So it's definitely not something to just jump into. I don't think. There's a lot of equipment and things for sale you see on Marketplace, and I don't regret it at all. I'm very happy with my career path now, as far as that goes. But I would really like to have had a little bit more equipment, maybe a Bobcat or something, and it's kind of out of range while I'm trying to grow and put money into the household as well as into the business. Because at the sideliner level, a lot of times you're just putting a lot of your money back into the business. And once you make that jump to full time, you have to put a considerable chunk of that back into the household.
That's a great point that I think a lot of people may not consider. It's really important as I've talked to Greg Burns and other people, who are doing it now. They're doing it full time, like Greg and yourself and others. It's you have to pencil out everything and really think through everything because, like you said, it's not just you can't put all the money back in the bees because you have to eat too. So it's important to do that. I do know, like in my case, I run, I'm 100 to 150 colonies is kind of where I'm usually at. I try to grow more and I keep ended up at that 100, 150 mark. So that's where I'm able to maintain pretty good right now. But I have learned that, it sometimes is important to upgrade your equipment. That can help you maximize what you're doing. It can help you be more efficient. But I'm not to the point yet to where I can purchase a skid steer,
Mm-hmm.
for minimum like 50, 60 grand. I use them for cheaper, but I just, I'm fortunate my brother has all that heavy equipment, so he helps me. But if I was doing it myself and didn't have any help at all, I wouldn't be able to do the pollination stuff. I'd have to have someone help me because I'm not going to go pay that kind of money for like you say, a bobcat or a skid steer until I can justify it through the money coming back from the pollination. So, and I actually kind of enjoy the honey. That's been my, no pun intended, that's been my sweet spot really the whole time. Is I figured out how to make honey pretty good,
Mm-hmm.
but I really would like to start moving in that direction of queens and nukes. All along I've known you can make queens. I've kind of learned a little bit about it. I've never really put a lot of effort into it. Every year I make some just out of necessity because I have some hives that make queen cells and I use some of those. As far as being intentional and going out and grafting or making specific queens from specific colonies, I've never been really good or really tried to do much of that. But I'm looking. I think it kind of started in some ways discussing, with you on that live stream last year when you talked about Bruce, you need to make your own queens, and then talking to Greg and some different people. I've just kind of decided that that's the direction I'd like to go. Maybe develop a line here, take kind of breed or graft from my best colonies and just try and build my own stock here and really try to create a desirable Southeast Alabama stock, line of stock. And so it's the direction I want to go. The nukes is another thing. I'm just so busy with my work and with my job and with everything I'm trying to do. And I feel this is what I feel like so often. And I think this will probably strike a chord with a lot of people out there. I just feel like I'm going in so many different directions. I really do. I feel like I have a hard time focusing on, what I want to do. Many times I go to the bee yard planning on doing one thing and I end up doing something totally different. And so it's very frustrating to me. So talk a little bit about how you your strategy as far as how you lay out what you want to do each time of the year.
You mentioned going to the bee yard and things not going how you want, and having to change your plans, and that's pretty common. But once you start being more intentional with your queen rearing and more selective with your queens, you're going to start getting more consistent bees. And when you have more consistent colonies across the board, then you're not going to have as big a problem with this hive and this hive being completely different ends of the spectrum. And that's going to take a lot of the stress off of you. You're going to be able to manage those yards as yards more than just as colonies. If you have a couple hives here and there and they're at swarm capacity, but the rest of them aren't built up enough for it, that kind of throws you off on that. So selecting and being really ruthless in what you're keeping and what you're allowing to be in your apiary will help you there. Like culling is something that I think a lot of beekeepers have a problem with, but it benefits us all from hobby level on up. If it doesn't fit and it's not up to par, up to standards, then you shouldn't have a problem with removing that queen from your apiary. And it's simple as just pinching her and giving another queen an opportunity to shine. That could be your next all-star. You never know. But getting that consistency in your apiary is very important. Having an idea of what you want, actually putting it to paper, what traits you're looking for, prioritizing those, And keeping a journal or a log or what have you on your breeding program will help you achieve those results, and a lot faster than you might think. You're going to have to put some time and years into it, but you'll start seeing results season to season that will really give you a positive outlook on that, especially with swarming. I don't tolerate swarmy bees. If I have a swarmy colony, then I'm going to remove those swarm cells. I'm not going to create nukes from those swarm cells. I'm not going to do anything to further that stock. I don't want to do that. I don't want to catch swarms and bring them into my apiary. I don't want anything to do with swarmy bees because it's a hereditable trait. It's just something that you're going to get worse and worse in your apiary if you allow it to keep on that way. And that's just my personal opinion on that. But by doing that, I don't have a huge problem with swarming. But a lot of that is also in my management, is that I do bust mine down pretty hard in the spring for splits. So I think that's a big part of my swarm management, is knocking them down so hard in spring after I get them up to that point, and not really allowing swarmy bees to have a place in my apiary.
Define what swarmy bees are. I know some people intentionally, like, they crowd their bees in order for them to, that's a little different than bees that
Yeah,
just want
that's
to
a good
swarm.
point. All bees want to swarm. It's the way they reproduce. For me, swarmy colonies are colonies that swarm for no real reason other than they just wanted to go. You've given them room. You've managed them in a way that other colonies under the same circumstances are not wanting to swarm. Also, swarmy bees to me are colonies that will throw cast swarms. They'll throw secondary and tertiary swarms. They'll just keep on swarm. They'll swarm themselves to death. Those little tiny swarms. And every year you see everybody posting their swarm catches up, and it seems to me like they're getting smaller and smaller. Even your primary swarms seem to be getting smaller. But I think if you catch these little swarms, these secondary swarms, especially the ones with virgins, those are just, to me, that they're hands off. That is something I just wouldn't even fool with. I'd leave them hanging wherever they was.
That is one of the most frustrating things for me is, last year here in my backyard, I had 6 or 7 of these apimays. It's kind of like my hobby bee yard back here, my bee lab, I call it, where I just have some nice fancy apimay colonies, and I bought those things, invested in last year. It looks really good. It's here in town, so they look good. But one of them, I'm not even sure which one it was, but that joker, I had, I think, six or seven colonies, maybe not even that many back here. And I ended up with like 16 swarms in my backyard. And I came home, like, and there'd be, like, giving them the space. I'd done everything I needed to do, and there'd be like 4 swarms hanging in a bush, blueberry bush, right there by my bees. And I'm like, what the heck? And after the initial prime swarms, then you have these little, almost baseball sized swarms. I mean, they're ridiculous. They're tiny, and those things just drive me crazy. And I if I remember right, I think I identified which one it was. I think they're all requeen. They're all looking strong right now. They don't seem to be wanting to swarm this year. So I think I might have gotten the problem taken care of, but there is nothing. Well, there are some things more frustrating, but very few things more frustrating than having a nice big double deep colony coming out of winter, or just a beautiful colony that's just going to make 3 or 4 boxes of honey or more. And then next thing you know, there's 2 frames of bees in there because they swarm and they swarm and they swarm and they swarm. And some of those swarms will have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 virgin queens in them. You're like, what the heck? What are you doing? So that is extremely frustrating. And I agree with you on that. I do not want those in there. But, a lot of times I'll catch those prime swarms and they'll turn into, usually the prime swarms, what they do is they'll supersede that queen within a fairly short period of time if it's the old queen. And then that new queen sometimes is just super awesome. But I'm like you. I've really, since we had that chat, last year we were talking in that stream team, a beekeeping chat, and you kind of shocked me when you said, well, I don't like to catch swarms. I don't do this. I don't do that. And I was kind of like, wait a minute, what? So I realized pretty quickly that you're not a really super conventional guy with a lot of what you're doing.
I used to like to catch them. It's a lot of fun.
It is fun, but
it's great fun. But if you're trying to have a breeding program or you're trying to develop a consistent stock, the worst thing that you can do is to bring
other stuff in.
All these, because there's already so much unknown in the breeding. She's going to go out and mate with 20 20 different drones, maybe more.
That's true.
So you already have so much variability in there to introduce even more with something that you don't know anything about it, other than that they are swarming or swarmy bees.
Yeah, that's true. And I tell you, that's part of my problem with my bees, because you mentioned the word consistency, and my bees are anything but consistent. It drives me crazy because I go in the bee yard and I've got a 5 frame nuke box on one end, and some double deeps mixed throughout, and then some double stack nuke boxes, all different sizes and shapes of colonies. And a lot of my initial stock, when I was getting started in bees, I bought a couple of colonies to get started, a couple of nukes from my mentor for that first year I bought. And they, they're good bees. But I think they're local Alabama feral stock. He breeds, I don't even know if he does queen breeding much anymore, but he used to actually breed and sell queens, and they were good bees, a little defensive sometimes, but good bees. But then I just went crazy catching swarms, going on swarm calls and everything, and just bringing everything in. There's something to be said for local feral bees, but when you do that, when you catch a swarm, this is something that people have to understand. When you catch a swarm, you have no idea what you're getting. If you drive 10 miles and go catch a swarm somewhere in the country or out in the middle of nowhere, or even in downtown, whatever city you're at, you have no idea the background of those bees. And so they may blow up and become a nice colony. They may be a swarmy colony, or they may just fizzle out and do nothing. And so you don't have any idea what you're getting. They may be full of mites. They may be mite resistant. You just don't know. And so that is true. If you want to be intentional, if you want to develop a certain stock, going out and catching random swarms from the feral stock or wherever it's coming from is not the best way to be intentional and develop a particular type of stock with certain traits. And so I agree with you there.
Another thing to think about too is that at the same time, these bees, while you're giving these unknown colonies a chance, while you're evaluating them, even if you don't have a drone frame in there, just with what they have around, they're cycling out hundreds of drones every brood cycle in the peak reproductive season.
That's true.
And that's going to have an effect with whatever other queens that you're.
So that's a perfect time to kind of slide into another topic that we could discuss here. Is when people get started with bees, they'll see a lot of drones sometimes, and they're like, why do I have so many drones and this and that? And they get upset about it. I've heard some people say that. And my opinion is, I like to see a lot of drones. That means there's a good strong colony there, as far as they're throwing out drones, especially if it's a colony I really like. And so talk a little bit about the importance of drones in your operation. I know that people think about the queens, but that's only half of the equation, not even really half the equation, because that queen is going to mate with multiple drones. And so talk a little bit about that relationship between queens and drones, and how you actually create the type of drones that you want in your operation.
I think I agree with everything you said there. And if you really want to raise queens, you really need to be raising drones as well. It's very important, and you can only raise a certain amount of queens, within your operation, but you can raise millions and millions of drones, that you're putting out into the area, saturating your area and your whole region with them. That drone, he is a copy of that queen. If you have really good queens, then those drones, that's a complete copy of her, and you're increasing your odds of getting better queens back that you're making when you have a lot of healthy and good stock drones in the area for her to mate with, not just the bare minimum. So I use a lot of the green plastic drone frames. I use a lot of wax foundation that kind of went awry, that now is predominantly drone comb. I'll just spray paint the top bar green. But I pull these out and I place these combs where I want them to be. I don't just leave them out in the apiary, leave them out in different colonies. And I try to control, as much as the extent that I can, how many drones my other colonies are producing, because you don't want inferior stock cranking out, even if you're not going to raise a queen. So you find a colony and you think they're not good enough to raise queens from, but you're allowing them to crank out all these drones. If you have bad combs in there, you need to pull those out. You need to cut that stuff out, or give it to a colony that you want to be raising those drones. Just try to be more intentional with the drone comb and what you have going on in those colonies. I really just can't stress how important it is to be raising an abundance of good quality drones if you're trying to make quality queens.
Well, that's one thing I I learned recently. I guess I've kind of always known it, but talking to Corey Stevens and also Ashby Miller and even Greg Burns and just different people, they all strategically place their mating yards amongst, desirable areas where they have drones flooding the area with surrounding bee yards, preferably within a certain distance, whatever direction that queen flies. Hopefully she'll be mating with drones that are desirable that you want her to mate with. But Corey mentioned something I thought was interesting in that, he's been keeping bees the way he keeps them now for years. And even some of the feral stock that he's catching now, he's finding they have those traits that he's looking for because his drones have been flooding the entire region.
You're definitely impacting the populations around you for sure.
Yeah.
You're only doing yourself a favor flooding them.
That's one thing I've never really been intentional at all with in the past. I just kind of let the bees do whatever they're going to do. And I've raised a lot of bees. I have a lot of good bees. I mean, they make a lot of honey. I have some that are very feisty and spicy. I don't mind if they're a little bit defensive, but when they get almost unworkable, they got to go. And I'm working on that right now.
It's hard to be that ruthless with them and cull these queens and cull out drones and decide that a colony just isn't worth it. I had a question from someone recently that asked me, what should they do with colonies that really aren't cutting the mustard this spring? After they made it through fall, they looked fine. They didn't combine them in the fall. Now they're in the spring. What to do with them? For those colonies, I don't do anything with them. I don't give those colonies brood. I don't give them bees or frames of brood to boost them. I really don't like the Robin Hood type beekeeping because I don't see that you get a lot of return from it. I would rather give the weak to the strong and split off the strong later. Or in this case, I just completely dissolve those. I'll kill that queen. When it's time to split and I'm doing my splits and I get down through here and I've decided that I'm going to leave 4 frames of bees or 4 frames of brood or 3 frames of brood, if the colonies don't make that count, then I will kill the queen and just completely dissolve that colony and use those resources that are in the hive to make up nukes.
When you say dissolve the colony, do you put them in other hives or just dump them out and let them find a new hive?
I just use all the resources. I'll kill that queen and I will put the frames of brood in different nukes. Oftentimes, I'll put one frame in one and another, or I'll have my boxes lined up. I'll use the food frames where they need to go, shake the bees into the nuke box, and then just completely remove that box or set the bottom board up or what have you. Just completely dissolve it as a colony, but use all those resources into nucleus colonies.
Yeah, just even start something new or just
start over with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So many ways to do things. And that's kind of opposite of what a lot of people think. They think you need to boost those weak ones up or give them a chance. And it's so tempting. I mean, it's something that's just hard even still for me to do if I see a colony that's a survivor colony, I want to keep giving them a chance. But really the best thing to do, even if you just dump them on the ground, let the bees go to another colony, just let them, because they'll go strengthen other colonies. So Gus, let's move on into something else. Maybe what are the traits that you're looking for in your operation?
Well, here lately, I'm focusing more on workability or gentleness, but survivability, which is mite resistance, is utmost importance in my operation. Honey production, propolis use, and again, workability. Those are the main things that I'm looking for.
And that's another thing I thought was interesting when I went back and reviewed the Stream Team Nugget from last year with the Russian bees, is how they're so efficient. I guess would be a good word for it. You mentioned they don't look like a lot of colonies. The Italians are not just packed with bees flown over the edges, but they just get more work done with less, so to speak. It seems like.
I'm not concerned with being migratory. And some migratory beekeepers make a living with Russian colonies, but carny type bees and Russian bees, they're more frugal. I want to sell bees. That's my main thing, is selling bees, selling nukes. And I want bees that are suitable for the people that I'm selling those to. And it's mostly hobby beekeeping. So I want bees that are frugal, that are not going to starve out, that have mite resistance, that are much more suited for stationary beekeeping. And I feel like I have that with my stock. Yeah, they don't build up or go through winter, rather. They don't go through winter with wall to wall bees, but they do build up very fast.
Yeah, that's what I'm noticing with. I got some queens from Greg. The feral bees here, a lot of them are really dark in color. I don't know what they are. They're not your Cordovans. I'll tell you that. Most of them are a little bit darker. Those bees. I got some. They have Caucasian influence from Greg. I know he calls them his Caucasian Appalachian mutts, and so they're really just they've got Caucasian, a heavy influence of Caucasian, but they also have some, I guess, local stock from up there. And I know you mentioned in the video that I guess the Carniolas, the Russians, the Caucasians, they're all they have some similar traits, I guess, in a way. But what they do is really amazing to me, how the Carniolas I've had in the past and now these Caucasian influenced bees, they brood way down in the wintertime. You almost start worrying about them. Like they'll have like a little tiny cluster, in there, and you'll be like, man, they look weak. And then all of a sudden, man, as soon as that NaturFlow hits, it's almost like you go in 1 week and you think, are they going to make it? And you go in a week or two later and the whole hive's full of bees. You're like, you're not supposed to be able to do that so fast. But they figure out how to do it. And so it's really amazing to me what they can do.
It is amazing. Having bees that will shut down like that, I think, is really important for new beekeepers and stationary beekeepers that aren't quite sure how to feed their bees, when to feed their bees. It saves them a lot of heartache, side by side with an Italian colony. That Italian colony, by the end of winter, it's going to be very light because they're going to keep brooding throughout.
That's true. Yeah. I've got some that just, man, this time of the year down here, it's probably a little bit like this up there as well. But here in this area, we have inconsistent flows in the early part of the year. It'll be, like the maples come in, a few things will bloom like in January and get the bees really stimulated. And then it'll back off, and then it'll be nothing coming in for a couple of weeks. And those big colonies like that, when they brood up, if you're not careful, even if they're heavy, 2 weeks later, they can starve if you're not careful. So you have to watch them really close.
I was just thinking, Bruce, we may have some people coming for us, the swarm bee people and the Italian bee people. But just remember, guys, this is just my preference in bees.
Sure.
No, a lot of people love Italian bees, and if you know how to manage them, it's the same thing. If you can manage that, not have them starve out, and they do good for you, then right on.
Yeah, that's very true. It's not. I mean, I've got Italian influence. I even specifically purchased some Italian queens a couple of years ago for the pollination type stuff, and so I'm not opposed to any of them really. But I really do like you say, for stationary bees. It's just kind of neat to see how all of them just react differently. There's nothing honestly cooler to me than to like open up a colony and it just be, you can't see the frames for the bees in a double deep. But when you open up that top box and then you break the top box off and the bottom box looks just the same, that's a rush right there. It's really cool, but that's a lot of bees that can consume a lot of resources. And so you got to just stay on top of them. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the Italian bee or Italian influence is the most common bee that you see out there. And really that's, I think, how many people kind of base their beekeeping practices, by keeping them strong and trying to develop those Italian bees. But, it is interesting to see these bees that brood way back in the wintertime and how it'll scare you. Honestly, it'll scare you. You're like, man, they're not going to survive.
It's one of the hardest things to get used to with them.
Then all of a sudden it's just like, boom, it's like an explosion. And then before you know it, they have as many bees or more sometimes as the Italians. It's crazy how that happens.
Yeah, especially come spring.
So there's some kind of a trigger that triggers them to just take off and do well. There are a lot of people probably watching this that are hobbyists that are just trying to grow a little bit, maybe double their population of bees, double their hive count. What are some techniques or tricks that you would mention to them for how to grow efficiently and effectively without having to feel like they have to be a professional grafter or anything like that? What are some things you can do as a beginning beekeeper to make it easier on yourself to grow and stay within your capabilities and learning?
The flyback method is a really good splitting technique for raising quality queens without grafting. And you can do it on any scale, really. I learned that from Ray Marler, a friend of mine out in California. He taught me what he knew about that technique and explained it to me, and then I was able to apply that in my apiaries, and it got me grown up to around 100 colonies before I even fooled with grafting. The most important thing to remember with quality queens is nutrition is the key to good quality, long-lived queens. So if you're not able to graft and control that with your cell builder, then you want to kind of make that same environment or similar environment, and the flyback allows you to do that. If you just pull a frame or two with limited and minimal resources out into a nuke box and try to let those raise a queen, they will raise a queen, but you can raise much higher quality queens in that environment, the flyback split environment, because you've essentially created a cell builder that has nothing but nurse bees, all the good pollen and honey resources in the colony, and all the correct age larvae in there.
Briefly discuss and describe a flyback split. I've been looking recently into the OTS split. It's a very similar concept, you know, where you just, the whole key, like you say, is to make sure that the cell starter, cell builder has the bees, the nurse bees, and the nutrition and all the things that they need to be successful. And that's something I maybe didn't understand in the past as much, as how important that is, you know, to set that up. So kind of briefly go through and walk us through a flyback split, what the
In a
technique is.
nutshell, flyback split, you'll take a strong colony and set a new box, push that colony to the side, set a new box and bottom board down in its place, and you'll find the queen and put her in the old spot. Then you're going to give her a frame of brood, or the frame that she's on, and a frame of food and some foundation, and you're going to feed them. They call it a flyback because all of the workforce that is out is going to fly back to the original spot. So it's going to become the nurse bees. They're going to change into whatever roles they need. If they need to be wax builders, they're going to do that. They're going to revert back to whatever they need to be. Any of the older bees that are in the colony, the original parent colony that you push to the side, they're also going to fly out. And when they fly out, they're going to go back to the original box that's there. So that leaves you with nothing but young nurse bees left, and in an abundance. And then all the open larvae and the other sealed brood, all this stuff, it's still in there. You got sealed brood emerging, so you have a replenishment for the nurse bees that are there. You have all the honey, all the pollen, all the right age larvae in that split. It's essentially a little cell builder. And they're going to pull out a bunch of cells. Then what you do after about 10 days, you'll come back in and you'll divide those resources up into however many splits you would like to make. You should be able to bust it down as harshly as you want, depending on the time of the season. You could do one frame of brood. You could do 2 frames of brood. I'd like to do 2 frames of brood and a frame of food and a foundation or 2, plus the cell. It eliminates you having to graft because you're going to get an abundance of cells in there, and you're going to be able to remove those. You can use a knife or a hive tool to cut them from the foundation. If it's wax foundation, it's really simple to cut them out. But if it's plastic foundation, I mentioned in the Stream Team Nugget how to do this is you kind of cut a keyhole out. You'll go above the cell in a circular motion, and then down around it and pry it off and fold that flap over the back. Then you're able to put these cells in the nukes as you're making them up. Someone did ask in the comments in that nugget where to place the cells, and you're going to want to place the queen cells in the brood of the nuke that you make so that they'll keep it warm and keep it viable for you. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Another question someone had, I believe, or that I was thinking about, is how do you actually apply that new cell to the brood? Do you just kind of press it gently with your finger?
I take my thumb, and you're going to have to sacrifice some brood probably for this, but I'll take my thumb along the outside edge of the brood, or depending on if it's going to be cold, I may put it dead in the center, but I'll take my thumb and make an imprint for the cell to rest in. And then the tag portion or the waxy portion above, it will go right above my indentation, and the cell itself will rest in the indentation because I don't want to mash it in and cause damage to the cell. If it's really hard comb, in a soft cell, you could crush the cell. So in the indentation of my thumb is where the queen cell will rest.
So, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Pinch it in. And the
Yeah,
bees will attach it.
yeah, they do. I noticed they do that. They're pretty good at doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, they'll have it really secured in there the next time you check.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about, splits, the importance of that, queens, drones. I know you graft now, and I know that that's as you get bigger, a lot of people want to do that because you can just do so many cells at once that way. So I guess you take the colonies that you really like the most, and that's where you make your queens out of, right?
Yeah, me and some buddies have developed some queen cards that we're using. I did a YouTube video on those. We about have them where we want them. They're about perfected how we want them. But using those cards, it's a criteria system with check marks and stuff to evaluate throughout the season. It's a little bit better than the cow tags that I was using, but it's a year-long process, really. I'm selecting from the best and trying to keep good notes on mite resistance, honey production, temperament, and all these things. And in the end, I'm going to have several breeder queens to select from. And at that point in the year, I'm going to be evaluating their buildup and how they're looking coming out of winter and into spring. And if they still fit the bill, then I'll pick a few as breeder queens, and the runners up will get drone combs and will be drone mothers.
Oh, I like that. I like how you select for both the queens and the drones. That's pretty cool.
The runners up are always going to be the drone mothers.
Do you start making queens like now? I mean, when you're starting to break your splits out, obviously you got to have queen cells for those. So is that
You
when
got to
you do it?
start. So for moving past and not in the flyback split type method, doing actual like do little splits and grafting, the first thing that we'll do is we'll have to set up our cell builders, and we'll probably do that the second week of March. We'll go in from our strongest colonies and essentially split those and gather like an assembly line, pulling brood frames, nurse bees, and collect them into boxes and take them back to the shop area and make our cell builders out of those. Shake bees as needed and give brood frames as needed. And then it'll be roughly not quite a week after that we'll start grafting. And then once that's on, then we can go ahead and start making our splits, because we want to have our cells ready to place.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to be really intentional with it, if you make up a split and you just put a cell in it that day, which can work, but more often than not, they're going to tear your cell down because they're going to want to build their own. So it's kind of a process. A lot of times we like to use queen excluders, bring the brood up, and then we'll come through and pull it, and you have aged out the larvae, and they'll accept the queen cells better.
I'm actually in the process of doing that right now. I have a bunch of splits kind of set up where we pulled them above the queen excluder on Friday and Saturday of last week. And I've got some cells coming. We're going to drop those cells in this weekend. And so we're going to split them off, and then drop some cells, destroy any queen cells that happen to be in there.
Right.
And then do that and core. Basically, that is the best way to make them, as they say, hopelessly queenless. Because if they have any queen cells, in there, I ran into that last year. I made a bunch of splits and dropped some mated queens in there. And it was probably 3 or 4 days later, and I destroyed any queen cells I found, but I missed some, I'm sure. And I think that, man, they just murdered those mated queens that I paid all that money for, because they just, they just wanted those queen cells, I think, is what happened. But, that's the next step for me, I think, is using that word intentional again, trying to figure out how to, do some of my own queens, whether it be flyback splits, whether it be whatever method to get my own queens going. It makes it better because you're not always having to depend on somebody else to get your cells from, because you got to time everything with somebody else's schedule when you're getting cells or queens from somebody else. Whereas if you're making your own, you can set it up on your own schedule, more flexibility.
Definitely gives you more control. It can be a pain, but if you go through all the trouble of selecting good breeder stock and grafting them out and getting your cells ready and going to place them, then you really don't want them to get tore down. So all this stuff being intentional and trying you want them to accept that stock.
So obviously you get your queens ready, you make your splits, and you work towards selling your nukes and throughout the year. And then I guess you do most of your bee sales in the spring and early summer. Is that correct? And then honey hits, and that's when you kind of shift over into honey mode, correct?
Yes.
One thing that you mentioned is that you do a lot of comb honey. And do you find that there's an education process you have to go through to help help teach people what that is, or do people they already just know what it is and what they want?
Much, much less than with creamed honey. I find that the education process is just daunting with creamed honey. With comb honey, not so much. It's a lot of different kind of people in the Memphis area, a lot of diversity, a lot of different ethnicities. So there's already built market for me for the comb honey. A lot of people from different countries appreciate comb honey much more than your typical Americans. It's just a cultural thing.
So you mainly make your comb honey actually in the medium frames or shallow
Yeah, I
frames?
use shallows because shallows get filled out quicker. The name of the game with comb honey is speed. The quicker you get the frame drawn out, filled, and capped, the more tender, the better the quality. It's just going to be
Better.
much better. So I like shallows for that reason because I can get them finished.
Yeah,
Much.
you don't do the Ross rounds or
I
those
don't.
kind of things. Okay.
I
I've done
don't.
that a little bit, and I down here we actually have a lot of people that ask for the what do they call it when you drop the comb down in the jar and you put honey
Chunk.
around it? Chunk honey. We have a lot of people that ask for that. They just call it, do you have any honey with comb in it? Which that's what they're talking about typically. I've just never done a lot of that. I do know one method that my friend that we harvest honey with, what he does is to set up his chunk honey and also some of his comb honey stuff. He does deep frames. He'll cut a piece of foundation in half, put it in the middle of the frame, and then the bees, they build that whole thing out, and it's perfect. The honey, the honey in that area that doesn't have the foundation in it is perfect. And so he'll cut that out, and it makes like a perfect size for the chunk honey. You can cut it out in the right sections and drop it in the jar, and then he'll just spin the honey out of the foundation section. Those frames also work really well as drone comb. If you put them down in a brood chamber like the next year or whenever, they always build drone. It seems like they typically build drone cells in that clear space. It gives them a guide, and they draw it out perfectly. And then you can either use it for comb honey or you can use it for drone comb. And he finds that when he uses that in his brood chambers, that he doesn't have near as many drones being built between the boxes, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
But your comb honey is so beautiful the way you do it, and it sounds like you sell it. Do you just sell it in the frames, right? Do you cut it up, or do you sell it just in the frames?
I sell it cut up in 2x4s, 4x4s, chunk honey, and the whole frame or whole supers.
So just whatever the demand is, or whatever you feel
Whatever
like
the
you need to
demand
do.
is. Chunk honey is a lot less demand. I personally find a lot more people ask for it than actually want it when it comes down to it. But that's another reason I prefer frames to a system like Ross rounds or half comb system or something like that.
Okay.
Because it gives me flexibility. If the frames aren't finished perfectly, then I'll have 3/4 of a frame or half a frame that I can use to cut out for chunk honey or something like that. I can still get my cuts out of it, or at least a few cuts out of it.
So really your main sources of income to really be full-time with this are bee sales, including mostly nukes, right? You sell a few queens, but mostly nukes. And then later in the year, the honey of all the different varieties.
I try to separate out my honey. I think that helps, just being on a smaller scale and separating out into the different varieties into buckets so that you're able to keep track of stuff a little better. It's not as blended, and having some varietal options for people, it kind of sets you apart a little. A lot of times I just separate it by the yard. If it's different in flavor or comparison, as long as it's something different that stands out from another type or yard, it will help to sell, because you give people options.
Sure. Yeah, I sell a lot of honey. That's been my primary source of income. A little bit of the pollination stuff I do as well, but I want to diversify now and really turn it into more of a business. The most nukes I've probably ever sold in a year were maybe 8 or 10. I need to figure that out. My issue is my confidence with the product I'm trying to sell, because like I said before, I've got all kinds of bees. I've got everything. I've got the whole spectrum, man. I've got yellow bees and almost black bees. I've got heavy Italian influence and Caucasian / Carniolan influence. I probably have some Russians. I probably have, who knows what I got, because they're a lot of local feral stuff. And so I just don't want to sell junk. That's what I'm worried about.
I mean,
you know,
you're
be
going to have complaints. When you're selling nukes, there's always going to be at least one person that's not happy with what they got. It's
sure.
what you do. What you do with that is what matters as far as your reputation. I say
Sure.
just sell the bees, Bruce, and let people know that you're working on your stock, and you're not as consistent as you'd like to be. If but they do a
Yeah,
good job for you.
I'm on the verge of that. I'm trying to figure out all that, and working with folks like yourself and Greg. You know, Greg Burns has gone full time, and he's been through that process recently. And in a sense, like you guys are doing different things, but a lot of the same stuff. But just kind of that how to go from hobby to playing with sideliner to just growing bees to now I want to turn it into a intentional business. And that's kind of one reason I wanted to have you on tonight, was to discuss some of these things. Gus, for folks who are watching this who are interested in taking it to the next level, whether it be a small hobbyist to a big hobbyist to a sideliner, or a sideliner to maybe a smaller commercial beekeeper like yourself, 300 to 400 colony range, what would be some of your top pointers or tips and tricks to give folks to kind of help them, number one, determine if that's what they want to do, and number two, kind of help move in that direction?
I would say that definitely think about the systems that you're going to need to have in place, your extraction system, how you're going to pull honey, what your labor force is going to look like. So just try to have these systems in place, like what you're going to need to save your back, and how you're going to have all this stuff to work out for you ahead of time, and not try to figure it out as you're trying to build the business. Be We keep talking about intentional, but be intentional with it if you're looking at making it into a business, so that you're prepared and you know what you're going to do. Have a plan, have your systems lined up, how you're going to improve year to year. And really, that stuff doesn't sound like much fun at all, and it's not, but that's what's necessary to have a business and have it work out. And you have to remember that it's agriculture and you're really at Mother Nature's whim. It can be quite stressful figuring out deadlines, selling bees. People want their bees at specific times, and you're selling them way ahead of the time that you're going to be delivering them. It can be stressful trying to figure out those timelines and delivery dates and things like that. So really have your stuff together, be organized, and try to have some systems in place and plans.
We watch all these people on YouTube. We read books. We go to bee club meetings, go to conferences, and we hear everyone else talking about what they're doing. And so we can get ideas from everyone, but really in each of our individual cases, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have things that we enjoy doing more. We're going to have things that we're better at. We're going to have different skill sets. And so it can get confusing hearing all the different things from different people. But I think it's super important that you kind of develop your skills, and then you begin to hone in on what you enjoy doing and what you feel like you can do. And then you can move forward with actually taking it to the next level. And so, you've talked about planning. You have to just pencil it out. You have to have an idea in your mind of the building you're going to build before you build it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned something else that's very important. It is agriculture. So there's so many variables with the weather, with all the different diseases, all the different things that can happen environmentally. You just have to plan for some loss and some good years and bad years. It is agriculture. It's farming, so to speak. And so
you have to have consistency in a lot of things, or you're not going to be able to replicate it.
And that's one thing that gosh, we didn't talk about as much as I really wanted to, was the consistency with the beehives, because that is my biggest struggle. It drives me crazy.
I'm not 100% there like I want to be, but that's my biggest goal in beekeeping, is to achieve consistency.
So yeah, I mean, even when you watch the videos by big time folks like Bob Benny, they go down their lines, their pallets, they're looking at the hives, and they'll have on a pallet, they'll have 3 that are busting the seams and 1 that's a little bit weaker, or they'll have a dead out, so it's, I don't know if it's possible to achieve 100% consistency.
I don't think so,
but it is possible to get closer and closer to that goal by having consistent stock and really working on that. And so
it allows those guys to be able to work those yards like that,
Yeah, man, they literally, they can almost crack the lid and then pick up the boxes and look from the bottom. And you can do that when you learn how to read a hive. You get to that point where you don't have to look at every frame. You can't do it if you're trying to do it as a business and make money at it. You can't spend 20 minutes in every colony. You just can't do it. You've got to go and you got to be able to read that colony and know what's going on and be able to move on. And so let me ask you before we close, this is one thing I should have asked earlier, but you have a colony, you don't like the queen. What if that's like a double deep colony? How do you find that queen, man? That's one of my biggest problems. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to actually find a queen?
One of the most important things, and you may already do it, but it's to always separate the boxes. If you go ahead and you start looking for her in that top box and it's still connected to that bottom box, then she has the possibility to run back and forth, and you don't want to chase her between boxes. If that's something you're not doing, I always recommend that you break the boxes apart. That way you at least know she's in one or the other. Typically, she's going to be where the brood is. And if you really just can't find her, make yourself a shaker box, staple a queen excluder on the bottom of a deep, however you need to do it, and they're going to be really unhappy with you. But just shake every frame out into that box and shake it through until you can catch her on that queen excluder.
All right, quick question on the shaker box, because I've tried this. So you're trying to get them shaken off the brood, right? But the brood is in the box you're trying to shake them off of. So do you just put them on is there an empty box beneath the shaker box, or do you have some brood now? Okay, so it's an empty box below.
Yeah, so you'll just set your empty box where your frame's underneath it, and you'll shake her through. I've heard of people saying that duct tape is something bees don't like to climb on, but in my experience, they still climb on it, but they're a little reluctant. So it may help to line the inside of your deep box with something that they don't really want to necessarily climb on. That way you don't end up with a ring or wreath of bees around it. You know, you want to make sure you shake them down pretty good. And make sure that your queen excluder is not deformed in any way, that she can't go through it, because then
no
it's
doubt.
all.
That's one thing I've noticed, man, when I try to do those type of techniques, the bees like to run up. You shake them in there and they just come running up the side. So I'm trying to smoke them down and it just becomes a mess. And I haven't had a lot of success using that. I've had a lot of people tell me about it, but I never really understood. I thought you had to try and get frames of brood beneath the queen excluder so they'd run through and try and get to those frames of brood. But that's what I've tried to do, is figure out how to get. But that makes sense if it's just an empty box. That makes a lot of sense. The bees, they're trying to get away from that smoke. So
yeah, and we're actually, with the shaker box, you want to physically shake it and sift them through.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You're going to shake your frames. You're going to shake your frames in there, and the bees are going to fall down on through there. But you also kind of want to shake it and keep them off the sides, because they want to come up, and she can come up that way too. So you want to shake your box and make her fall down to the queen excluder.
Okay. Well, that's why they call it a shaker box.
Most of them, you know, and it will really upset the bees. They really don't like that at all.
Yeah.
It's not a pleasurable experience. So make sure you got the smoke rolling.
Yeah. After 10 years, you'd think I could find the queens better, but it seems like I'm able to find them whenever I'm not looking for them. You know what I mean? That queen will be up there dancing, you know, rolling over and just plowing through the bees. So nice and calm when I'm not looking for her. But when I'm looking for her, man, they tend to have a good, they tend to be really good at
how it goes.
It's crazy.
Yeah, when you're looking for her, you can't find her. But
all right, Gus. Well, man, I appreciate your time. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm going to be trying to do more of these intentional beekeeping type interviews. And you're one of my first ones. I've thought about you. I've been wanting to get you back on here onto the channel, and I really appreciate you coming on. For anyone who is interested in finding out about you, finding your channel, tell us about your channel a little bit. First of all, what's the name of it? And then tell us kind of what you do on there. And I'd encourage anyone to go check it out. I think you'll be very impressed with what Gus is doing. He talks about all kinds of tips and tricks. You know, there's no frills about it. Gus just says it like it is, and it's real easy to follow. I really like it. And so tell everybody about your channel, man.
It's Gus Mitchell, Crane's Nest Honey. I pretty much just make videos as I feel like it on what I have going on at that time in the year. The channel's maybe it's a little over a year old. Quite a few videos on there, but a lot less here recently over the winter. Like Bruce said, it's just what I have going on throughout the year. I just try to show you guys, and hopefully you learn something from it.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed in watching those videos is that, you know, you turn the camera on and you say, look, this is what I'm doing here and this is why I'm doing it. And then you show it. And so it's really good because,
I'm really bad at editing, Bruce. So I just try to do one take
well, that's
video.
in a way that many times that's better because it's just raw. It's raw. That's what I like about it, it's raw footage. And you just kind of set that camera up and go through the hives or walk through the honey house or just whatever you're doing. And you just explain it point blank what you're doing. And I've learned some things from it and I've learned a lot from you. And it's been really fun watching your channel grow and hopefully it'll continue to grow. And listen, I understand that, you know, you mentioned you haven't posted a lot of videos lately. It can get just exhausting. And in the wintertime, there's not a lot you can do out there lots of times.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of, sometimes you got to take a little break and there's nothing wrong with that. But I hope you'll, as you kind of ramp it back up, you'll give us some more content. I look forward to watching it, Gus.
Well, I intend to.
Well, I guess we'll close it out, man. Anything else? Any final words of wisdom for us?
No.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching Bruce's Bees and this intentional beekeeping playlist. I hope you go check out some of the other videos on there. Also, we have a playlist for our stream team beekeeping chats, of which Gus has a couple of videos, or he was in a video with us live, and then there are a couple of stream team nuggets. There are 3 with Gus in there from that live where he gives some really good information on windbreaks, also Russian bees, and recently did one on the flyback splits. So you can go over to the playlist over at Stream Team Nuggets and look at that. And go check out his channel. I think you'll be impressed and you'll want to subscribe to that. It's good stuff. As I guess we'll go ahead and check out, Gus. I appreciate you coming on tonight. I'd just like to say, everyone, y'all take care, be safe, and we'll catch you on the next one.